Hello friends and welcome to Study Center. We were discussing Indian polity for SSC CGL exam. In the previous session, we had an introduction to the chapter where we have discussed the definition of polity, the definition of constitution. We also discussed some of the frequently used terms. In this session, we'll be discussing the history of Indian constitution, sources and inspirations of Indian constitution, and we'll be starting our discussion from Regulating Act 1773 to Indian Independence Act 1947. We all know Britishers have came to India for the purpose of trading. In the year 1600, they came to India in the form of East India Company as traders. But after the Battle of Plassey, they got control over Bengal. After the Battle of Buxar, they got the Diwani right to collect tax from Bengal, Bihar and Odisha from the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II. That means now they got right to collect tax directly from the people of Bengal, Bihar and Odisha. And this was their first step to conquest the whole Indian subcontinent. After the Great Revolt of 1857, the East India Company was abolished by the British Crown. And in the year 1858, the British Crown took the direct responsibility for governance of India until independence. With independence came the need of a constitution. And for this purpose, in the year 1946, a Constituent Assembly was formed. On 26 January 1950, our constitution came to begin. But the idea of constitution was given by M.N. Roy back in the year 1934. In this session, we'll discuss all the rules those were introduced by the British government, as various features of Indian constitution and polity have their roots and inspiration in the British rule. Let's start our discussion with the Regulating Act 1773. This act came during the time of the company rule. At this time, the East India Company has already acquired Bengal, Bombay and Madras. The Regulating Act came to control and regulate East India Company. This act also laid the foundation of central administration in India. What is central administration? We have already discussed this in the introduction class. In case of central administration, the whole country will be controlled by a single entity. To achieve this, the Governor of General became the Governor General of Bengal. And the Governor of Bombay and Madras became the subordinate of the Governor General of Bengal. Right? That means the Governor of Bombay and Madras will be assisting the Governor General of Bengal, thus implementing a form of central administration. Lord Warren Hastings became the first Governor General of Bengal. With this act, Supreme Court was established at Kolkata in the year 1774. Then came Pitt's India Act in the year 1784. With this, the commercial and political functions of the East India Company were now separated. The Court of Directors were looking after the commercial affairs, and a new body called Board of Control was created to look after the political affairs. Thus, it introduced the dual government system. With this act, the East India Company's territories were now called as the British possession in India. Then came the Chartered Act in the year 1833, which was the final step towards centralization in British India. This was achieved by making the Governor General of Bengal as the Governor General of India. That means now the Governor General of India has complete authority over the British possession in India. He has now all the civil and military powers vested with him, and the Governor General of Bombay and Madras were now deprived of their legislative powers, and the Governor General of India was given exclusive legislative powers for the entire British India. Thus, a central government was now established in the British possession of India. And Lord William Bentinck became the first Governor General of India. Then came the Chartered Act 1853. With this, for the first time, the legislative and executive functions of Governor General Council were now separated. What do you understand by legislative function and executive function? We have already discussed these things in the introductory session. In simple terms, the legislative functions of a body is to make law. The executive function is to execute or implement the law. This act provided a new 6-member council called Legislative Council inside the Governor General's Council to look after the legislative work. This Governor General's Legislative Council later came to be known as Indian Legislative Council or Central Legislative Council. This act for the first time introduced an open competition system for selection and recruitment of civil servants, and this was open to Indians also. The company rule ended in the year 1858. After that started the Crown rule from the year 1858 till independence. After the revolt of 1857, which was also known as the First War of Independence or Sepoy Mutiny, the British government felt that the East India Company was not able to handle the matters efficiently. So it decided to abolish the East India Company and transfer all the powers to the British Crown. That means now the British position in India were to be governed in the name of a majesty. The Governor General of India now became the Viceroy of India. Viceroy was made the direct representative of British Crown in India, and Lord Canning became the first Viceroy of India. This act also ended the system of double court. That means the Board of Control and the Board of Directors were now ended, and instead it created a new office called Secretary of States of India, which had the complete authority and control over the administrative part of the government. The Secretary of State was a member of British Cabinet and was directly responsible at the British Cabinet. It also established a 15-member council to assist the Secretary of State of India. The council was an advisory body, and the Secretary of State of India was made the chairman of this council. I hope you understood the changes. The Board of Control and the Board of Directors were now replaced by the Office of Secretary of State of India, who has a complete control and authority over the administrative part. But the Secretary of State of India was a member of British Cabinet, and he was to be assisted by a 15-member council called as Council of India, and the Secretary of State of India was made the chairman of the Council of India. The post of Governor General of India ended, and now the Viceroy was appointed as the direct representative of British Crown in India. Now let's move to Indian Council Act 1861. After the revolt of 1857, the Britishers understood that they cannot rule India for a long time without the cooperation from Indians in administration. So, through the Indian Council Act 1861, Lord Canning nominated 3 Indians to his legislative councils. Lord Canning was the Viceroy of India at the time. The 3 Indians were Raja of Banaras, Maharaja of Patiala, and Sir Dinakar Rao. This act also initiated the process of decentralization, which was started by the Regulating Act 1773. That means the legislative powers were now transferred to Bombay and Madras presidencies. This act empowers the viceroys to issue ordinances during the emergency without any concurrences with the legislative councils. The duration of these ordinances were 6 months. Another Indian Council Act came in the year 1892, and this act increased the number of additional non-official members in central and provincial legislative council. Notice this thing here. After the process of decentralization, now legislative councils were present in both central and provincial level. Even if the numbers of additional members were increased through the act, the official majority was maintained by the Britishers. The act also made a limited and indirect provision for the use of election in filling up some of the non-official seats in both central and provincial legislative council. This act also increased the functions of legislative council and gave them the power of discussing the budget and addressing questions to the executives. Remember one thing, till now the Indians were not allowed to be the part of the executive team. Another Indian Council Act came in the year 1909, which was very important. It was also known as the Morley-Minto reforms. Morley was the Secretary of States at the time, and Minto was the Viceroy of India. With this act, the number of Central Legislative Council was now raised from 16 to 60. It also provided for the first time the association of Indians with the executive councils of Viceroy and Governor. And Satyendra Prasad Sinha became the first Indian to join the Viceroy's Executive Council as a law member. With this very act, the divide and rule policy of the British started, as they introduced a separate electorate for Muslims. That is, the Muslims are now to be selected by only Muslim voters. Lord Minto has introduced this system, and for this particular reason, he was called as the father of communal electorate. That's it for today's session. We'll discuss the remaining acts in the next session. Let's first discuss some of the key points which are important from the exam point of view. The first point is the idea of constitution was given by M.N. Roy in the year 1934. Lord Warren Hastings was the first Governor General of Bengal. Lord William Bentinck was the first Governor General of India. For the first time, legislative and executive functions of the Governor General Council were separated in Chartered Act 1853. The East India Company was abolished through the Government of India Act 1858. After that, the British portion of India were ruled in the name of British Crown. With this act, the Viceroy became the direct representative of the British government, and Lord Canning became the first Viceroy of India. and Lord Stanley became the first Secretary of State of India. Indian Council Act 1861 gave powers to the Viceroy to issue ordinances in case of emergencies. Indian Council Act 1909, which are also known as Molle Minto reforms, introduced the separate electorate for Muslims. And for this reason, Lord Minto was known as the father of communal electorate. In the next session, we'll be discussing the 3 remaining important acts which have majorly influenced our constitution. And those are the Government of India Act 1919, Government of India Act 1935. The structure of our constitution is based on this act, and the final Indian Independence Act 1947. Thanks for watching and see you in the next session.